Aaron.
Yeah.
Why didn't you say it the first time I said Aaron?
Because it's pronounced Aaron?
You done messed up, Aaron!
Aaron is here, everyone. Welcome back for more SPTV, where every day is a great day not to be in a cult. So a great day for Priscilla Presley then. Guys, the day has finally come. I've been waiting for this day for Priscilla herself, in her own words, to publicly announce she is no longer a Scientologist. Thank you, Priscilla. This is incredible. This is from her new book. And it's weird. There's some strange contradictions here, because her book is a lot more positive on the subject of Scientology itself than one might expect for someone who is out of Scientology. But what's also interesting to me is that Priscilla herself reflects on her relatively positive experience in Scientology, or should I also say her experience being treated well in Scientology, and admits right from the jump that she's not saying her experience and her being treated well contradicts any other stories of any other former members of horrific abuse. She says, you know, the most obvious explanation is my time in Scientology was at the Celebrity Center, and I was a celebrity, and Scientology treats celebrities differently, and celebrities are very valuable to Scientology. So I wasn't particularly, you know, offended or surprised by Priscilla speaking relatively positively of Scientology. Not a big surprise. Also, I think it's worth noting, at least, that parents, or should I say people who got into Scientology as adults on their own volition and then brought their kids into Scientology, they do have a little bit of an incentive to tend to dwell a little bit on how good Scientology is. Because otherwise, how do you justify having brought your children into it? How do you justify having stayed in for so long? How do you justify having having had your kids in for so long? I think a lot of people who are second, third, fourth, fifth generation Scientologists will tell you that that tends to be a little bit of the flavor they get from their own parents. What's interesting about, I'm going to show you the actual excerpts from the book. There was another interesting piece here. Oh, yeah. Priscilla gets a lot wrong in this book, even about Scientology, even about David Miscavige, but she gets it wrong in ways that are even worse for Scientology. Anyway, I'll show you some examples here. Now, guys, you might remember a couple years ago, I did an interview with Priscilla's son, Navarone. And Navarone made it very clear that Priscilla was out of Scientology. But a lot of people had the opinion that maybe he was just out there doing PR control, that he was lying to make Priscilla look better, that, you know, Priscilla wasn't speaking for herself. So of course, Navarone would want people to think his mother was out of Scientology. Now, I knew there was no way Navarone would be allowed to say something like that on my channel if it weren't true. The other thing Navarone said in the video that we did together is that he told his mom, Priscilla, that he was coming on and doing this video with me on my channel. And she was like, oh, really? But she didn't say don't. And so I knew Priscilla was out of Scientology. Navarone even said it. I might even show you some clips from that. But let's jump right to the section. And guys, I cannot stress this enough. Priscilla Presley would not ever, as a Scientologist, be allowed to say she was no longer a Scientologist just to do some sort of PR damage control for herself. The Scientology authorities would never, ever allow such a thing. Scientologists are allowed to lie about this in a few different ways. They can sort of pretend that they're not a Scientologist, but never were. So like Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith, they never actually publicly admitted to being Scientologists. They admitted to dabbling because we're students of all the world's religions. Total bullshit. Will and Jada were diehard dedicated Scientologists. So they sort of pretended like they never were and therefore never had to say they'd left. Scientologists are also allowed to say, what? A Scientologist? Yes, of course, Scientology is something that I study, but I'm also a Christian. Total lie. There's no such thing as being a Scientologist and a Christian. But if you are known to be a Scientologist or have ever known to be a Scientologist, have ever said you're a Scientologist, and you're still a Scientologist, you are not allowed to say you are no longer one. It's just like a couple weeks ago when I did a video about Sea Org executive Charlie Bills. Charlie Bills' name was brought up in the press for being tied in to somewhat of a scandal of a Scientologist-run company called Dream Exchange in Chicago. And Charlie Bills' name came up in the story, and the reporter reached out to Charlie Bills, and Charlie Bills said, I no longer work for the Church of Scientology. Now, he didn't say I was no longer a Scientologist, but he said, I no longer work for the Church of Scientology. And I was like, what? Charlie Bills has been working for the Church of Scientology for over 45 years. And there's no way he would be allowed to say he no longer works for Scientology if that were not really true. And I said, hey, anyone out there who knows what's going on with Charlie Bills, please let me know. Well, lo and behold, we found out it was totally accurate. Charlie Bills no longer works for the Church of Scientology. So that's an example of like, I very much know what Scientologists are allowed to say and what they're not allowed to say. And if anyone is out there thinking that Priscilla Presley is just saying this because she's trying to get some distance for PR reasons, but she's really still a Scientologist, please understand that is not true. Priscilla Presley is absolutely out of Scientology. And the fact that she's now saying it herself publicly for the first time, boom, signed, sealed, and delivered. Done. That's all the evidence anybody should need. Okay, so let's jump to the most obvious version of this book where Priscilla says what she says. She's referring back to an incident where Lisa Marie Presley showed up to the Scientology base in Clearwater to have a showdown with David Miscavige. And now David Miscavige didn't show up for the showdown. Instead, he sent his sisters like a little baby back bitch. But this is an example where Priscilla gets something wrong, but she gets it wrong in a way that's even worse for Scientology. In Priscilla's version of the story, it was David Miscavige himself who showed up for the showdown, and Lisa Marie Presley basically handed him a whole six-pack of whoop ass. Now, the real story is David didn't show up, and Lisa Marie Presley basically had it out with Dave's sisters. But in Priscilla's version, it was Dave himself. And so that's where this particular anecdote enters in. Priscilla says, the aftermath was frightening for her, Lisa Marie. She, Lisa Marie, called me from Florida after her visit to headquarters and said, Mom, I'm so scared. I gave it to David, and now they're following me. There's black limos parked outside my house and following me around. This is real. This is what they do. When Lisa took such a firm stand against the church, it forced me to re-examine my own relationship with it. With the passage of time, I'd begun to feel increasing pressure from the church. In the early years of Scientology, the expectations for me had been moderate. But as I went up the levels on the bridge to total freedom, the demands increased exponentially. Members are expected to commit more and more time to their personal growth on the higher levels, up to 6 hours per day. Financial commitment increases too, as you're expected to help the church grow. The church must come first in your life, ahead of everything else. For a long time, I was able to cope successfully with the church's expectations. The problem I eventually confronted, though, wasn't time or money or even the church's philosophy. It was my family. The first consideration was Lisa. She had taken a courageous and risky stand against the church, and I wanted to support her. My parents also became an issue. Mom and Dad were faithful Catholics, and I was asked to disclose this when while doing auditing. That's funny. That's funny because Priscilla doesn't use the language the way a Scientologist would use the language, and I wonder if that's her trying to speak the way normal people would speak. Probably. Okay. Scientologists consider people who belong to other religions, especially those that are critical of Scientology, negative influences who might lead members away from the philosophy that Hubbard taught. To prevent that from happening, I was subtly encouraged to loosen ties with my parents. Wow. That was not going to happen. I loved my parents deeply and had no intention of distancing myself from them. If I had to choose, I would choose my family every time. Ultimately, Lisa and I left the church about the same time. She went out with a bang and a lot of headlines. I chose to go quietly. It was hard to leave. There were things about Scientology that I loved. I still miss it sometimes. I miss the auditing. Wow, that's a frank admission. I miss the auditing, which lifted some of my burdens, and I miss being part of the community with people like John Travolta, who first got me into Scientology. John remains my friend. Not for long, Priscilla. John was allowed to remain your friend as long as you had not publicly departed Scientology. John will either stop being your friend, or perhaps your departure might be the final thing John needs to maybe start considering leaving himself. But if John is allowed to continue to remain your friend, it would just be another example of Scientology, of celebrities in Scientology being allowed to live by a completely different set of rules than any other Scientologist. Okay, she goes, John remains my friend. He was one of the first to call when my daughter passed away. I wish him well, along with the many good souls who pursue the same ideals I once hoped would help the world. Sounds like Priscilla's acknowledging that John Travolta may not be her friend anymore. Saying, I wish him well is an interesting thing to say about someone you just said is still your friend. You know, I thought I was going to go through the other excerpts of this book, and I don't think that's necessary anymore. That was a very powerful segment. I don't think anybody, there's not an, ask any ex-Scientologist, ex-staff member, ex-SEERG member, would a Scientologist be allowed to write about Scientology in that way publicly and publicly depart Scientology while still secretly being a Scientologist? The answer you will get from every single one is hell no. Okay, so I do want to show you guys two short segments from my interview with Priscilla's son. And this is where, let me share the right page. This is where he says that he told his mom he was coming on my channel and how she responded.
Wow. Are you still close with your mom?
Close? Yeah, I love my mom. Very, really, really, really close.
So, but like coming on here and doing this with me is not going to create problems for you?
I told her about it. She said, "Oh, really?" She said, "You know what?" She said, "You know, I never really had a problem with that."
With
So,
what?
Hold on. Yeah.
Scientology, I suppose. I mean, but she was one of the elites. They treated her. They didn't make her do anything with a toothbrush or lick any floors. So I don't really think she really had, anything to really, really complain about. She was treated as a very high profile member.
Oh, I got something. It's an anecdote. It's not a bad anecdote about your mom, but it's an anecdote that if you let me know if you've heard this or if there's.
Okay. I could have sworn I said, and she didn't tell you not to do it. I probably say it later. Okay, let's jump forward to the last couple minutes of this segment where he says exactly when his mom left Scientology. It's very consistent with what Priscilla is now saying in her book.
To the best of your knowledge, when did Priscilla stop actively participating in Scientology?
When my sister told Miscavige off.
Oh, really? She's been done since then?
Yeah.
Wow. That's kind of a huge deal.
Yeah.
The world does not know that.
Yeah, they should.
Okay, if you want to see my...
There you go. So that's interesting because even Navarone said when my sister told Miscavige off. And I think the way this all makes sense is Lisa Marie showed up to Flag to Dave's office intending to meet with Dave. Dave didn't show up. His sisters did. She had it out with her sisters, but she did then address Dave directly, speaking into the camera because, all these premises are under, audio and video recording at all times. And so Lisa Marie looked into the camera and said, I know you're watching Dave, and then told him off to the camera. So that's how that works. Okay, something else I want to highlight. So there has been speculation, really just by pretty much one person, that Priscilla Presley's been lying about being out of Scientology because when she was doing a promo tour for something recently, she wore this necklace, and this is being identified. Oh, come on. Okay, let me, my little Zoom function doesn't want to work properly. Okay, let me get this front and center. Here we go. This necklace right here is being identified as a Scientology necklace. Look at that necklace very closely. It does have some vague resemblance to a Scientology necklace, a Scientology symbol, because it is an 8-pointed cross. However, there are many 8-pointed crosses, and the Scientology one looks very unique, especially when it's on a necklace. And it doesn't look like this version where the you know, you have the cross and then you have what I call sort of the star, the extra 4 points. In this necklace, the star is way too big and the cross portion is way too thin. So this is what a Scientology symbol looks like when it's on jewelry. It's also what it looks like when it's in print, but this really shows you the obviousness. You can see the relative size of the star to the cross, and you can see the flared endpoints on the ends of the Scientology cross. That is how it always looks when it's on jewelry. Here's another smaller example of it. You can still see the flare, the flared ends of the Scientology cross, and you can see the relative size of the star in the middle. Now, I guess you guys can come to your own conclusions on this, but I look at this cross right here, and as someone who spent 30 years in Scientology, it doesn't even look like a Scientology cross to me. Maybe it does to others. It just doesn't look like it to me. And, you know, yeah. Priscilla Presley has left the building, folks. Priscilla Presley has finally publicly departed Scientology. And I think that's freaking awesome. Also, between Priscilla and her daughter, Riley, if any one of these two people are still in Scientology, it's Riley, not Priscilla. Now, I don't believe Riley is an actual active member of Scientology, but Riley has some very, very close Scientologist friends, mostly Georgie Flores. And I think Riley is one of these people who, like her mother up until now, would never publicly say that she's out of Scientology because it would force her Scientologist friends to disconnect. But if we wanted to say that Riley was in Scientology, it's well known now that that Riley and her mom were both recently wrapped up in litigation with each other, and Scientologists aren't allowed to litigate against each other. So either, it depends on who you want to ask about this. Either both Riley and Priscilla were both Scientologists, and against Scientology rules, they were litigating against each other, which that's an option, but not true. Or Riley has been a Scientologist, and the only reason she was allowed to litigate against her mother and vice versa is because Priscilla was no longer a Scientologist, which is a possibility. Or what I believe to be the case, neither of them are Scientologists anymore. And they're allowed to litigate against each other to their heart's content, except at this point, Priscilla Presley has now publicly departed Scientology. There's no going back. And Riley is still keeping her mouth shut and playing nice and saying decent things about Scientology so that her dear Scientologist friends don't have to disconnect from her. That is the real state of affairs. Okay, let's see what we have here. Handmade by Ruby. Thank you. Have a fantastic protest tomorrow. Thank you, Ruby. And thank you for being a channel member for 18 months. Yep. People start flying in from all over the country today. It's going to be crazy. I don't know if I'll be doing any other videos today. Maybe me and Jenna will squeeze one in, but, tomorrow is Friday. We're having an absolutely awesome, huge protest in downtown Clearwater at 5:30 p.m. We'll be having a giant after party at Prelude Sports Bar, downtown Clearwater on Cleveland Street at 7:30 p.m. Anybody at all, feel free to join us either at the protest or at the after party. Thank you for hanging out with me, guys, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, Oh, dancing for my love. Then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe